Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the London session recap for the Tuesday 19th of July 2022. So going to use a bit of bar replay for this session. Quick look at the daily chart. We've obviously been selling off quite aggressively for quite some time, and we are in a clear bearish trend, trading between this swing high and this swing low. We've come into some extremely old weekly demand from all the way back in 2002 roughly, I believe. So, quite some time ago. I'm aware of them. I know they're there. If you go and backtest old demand zones on the higher time frames, you will still see that they play out just like anything else. But like I've been saying, right, most of my focus is on the recent price action. So whilst I'm aware they're there and I'm anticipating potentially we'll start to pull back, the lower time frames and the recent price action gives us basically all the information you need to know, right? If you didn't have these drawn on here, we wait for the lower time frame to give us those confirmations. As we can see last week, we ended up with a big nice spike and then that aggressive sort of retrace with that morning star formation, showing us that it's likely that pullback is going to be kicking in. But again, this is clear on the lower time frames because when we jump down, you will see nice big sweep on the 4 hour and M15, aggressive V-shaped retrace, and then we start to break structure to the upside. So that's essentially what those higher time frame candlestick formations are showing you on a lower time frame, right? But yeah, just looking to basically play this daily pullback up to around these premium levels of supply. Of course, price does not have to pull back up that high, but trying to play those counter, against the daily bearish trend, looking for longs. Now's kind of the time to do it at the start of the move where you have much higher potential for price to pull back into those levels. So taking a look at the 4 hour chart, swing trend is pretty large as well. I'm just viewing this as small internal structure down here. So once we had that sweep last week, nice aggressive V shape, but more importantly, when the internal structure shifted bullish, so we got a break of this high here, breaking close above. Now that's when we have that confirmation that we're getting that 4 hour swing pullback, right? Once we get that internal structure realigned, now we've got a lot more confirmation that we're going to have that deeper pullback. So at that point, old areas of supply pretty much just become reaction points for pullbacks, okay, internal pullbacks. So we expect to have a bit of internal pullback, push up higher, right, like we did here. Didn't pull back that deep. Typically that doesn't happen on EU after that first sort of initial internal trend change. We don't typically tend to pull back that deep, and momentum can be quite strong until we get up to around here, okay? So yeah, just gonna expect that internal structure to continue bullish until it comes up to these levels. And then once we get that bearish internal break of structure, then we can expect those internal structures to stay aligned and take out the weak swing low, okay? So this is a very, very bullish sign. We can expect that swing pullback, which can give us a lot more confidence for taking those longs and targeting up towards these next levels of supply. Likewise, the level that we came off yesterday wasn't really that significant of a level, right? The distal had already been mitigated and caused quite a big move. So, only giving really a bit of a small reaction from that level there, just to give a bit of a small pullback to then continue up higher. We may see a bit more of a significant pullback from here, but even this, right, not looking at that much data to the left, it's only a bit of a small supply zone, so that will remain to be seen. But for now, my expectation is it would only provide a small internal pullback to continue up higher towards these more significant levels of supply there. So M15, again, focusing on the bigger swing structure here, where this was that last true swing pullback for me. Then we had the breaker structure to the downside, and then we took that high there. So yeah, coming into the London session, we do obviously have this massive swing range, but when we get those first initial trend changes on EU, price doesn't tend to pull back that deep. Also, we have these quite clear internal pieces of structure here as well, which had not been broken. So we can anticipate that that strong internal low is going to hold, right? Basically until it doesn't. Until we get a break of that, we can continue to assume that structure is going to hold itself. Also, some of you do map your swing structure a little bit tighter, and you would have had that as your swing low anyway. So yeah, more than happy to look for longs, as we discussed in the meetup yesterday, just continuing to follow this order flow basically until it's disrupted, right? So coming into sort of pre-Frankfurt open, we can see that during Asia we pulled all the way back down, but this strong low had not yet been broken. However, does that mean I want to jump into long straight away? Well, in this particular case, no, because whilst I'm aware that we could have, right, like I was saying, we could have that deeper pullback down into these more discounted levels of demand. Until that low goes, until we get that bearish boss, I'm just going to assume that that internal structure is going to continue, okay? So yeah, like I was saying, that strong low is going to hold, but in this particular scenario, do I want to jump into longs straight away? Well, no, because price had come down into pretty much the extreme unmitigated demand. It reacted from it and then pushed down and traded through below here. Okay, so that tells me here that demand has flipped to supply and price could easily pull back into here and then continue down, right? And we get that larger bearish IBOS and we'd sell off. So there's not really any risk reward at this point as I'm coming to my charts to try and long pass through this, right? Because at this point that could continue. So that's why I said in my pre-session analysis, for longs, for me to consider, first I want to see basically the supply fail and I want to see the small internal structure shift bullish. Okay, so the way I have price mapped is we have the larger swing structure, right? And we're looking for that higher low to form to take out that weak swing high. Then we have what I refer to as a larger internal structure, which some of you may have as mapped as your swing, but I'm just mapping that as a larger internal structure, which at this point had stayed bullish. And then from within that, you can see the smaller internal structure, right? Where we have these small swings within here. So to get true alignment in this instance, because there's no risk reward for me to want to take longs, even though this low is holding at this point, I would want to see this fail. So I want to see price break out of this supply to show me that demand is taking control, but also ideally we get a nice break and close above that high. So at that point, you then have the smaller internal structure, i.e. this piece of structure here, then switches bullish and now is realigned with the larger internal structure, right? Because what is the framework that we use for internal structure? Once that internal structure here shifts bullish, that now signals that this larger pullback is now finished, right? So this low is going to hold, that high low is now in place, and now we can look for that move to then try and target that weak high, because once this shifts bullish, what do we expect? We expect that internal structure to stay bullish until it takes out that high, right? We expect those demand ranges to hold until it takes out this high, right? Hopefully it's kind of nice and clear. So yeah, that's it. Keep it nice and simple. Wait for this to fail. If it's going to happen, then we can look for longs. Could you look for shorts from within here? Yes, maybe, but it's very, very aggressive, right? At that point, you were trying to trade against the bullish swing structure. You're trying to trade against this strong low holding. So I wouldn't necessarily be as keen for that, right? You'd rather wait for that and look for that. Otherwise, the high probability to wait for shorts would be, let's get that confirmation that the internal structure is shifting bearish, and then potentially you could look for shorts for that movement. Okay, obviously it's not quite as simple as that because you also have 4-hour demand and whatnot, but that kind of be, the most basic scenario would be waiting for really for shorts at that point. But yeah, whilst this low is still holding, just keep it nice and simple. Wait for supply to fail, wait for structures to shift, and then we can look for longs. Okay, so let's play this forward a little bit as we kind of come into the session open. So then we get supply clearly failing and we get the candle closure above this high here. So now that's what we wanted, right? We have the small internal structure has now shifted bullish. Supply has now failed, so demand's taking control. We now have confirmation that this low is holding, that the small internal structure is now aligned with the large internal structure, and now we assume that this small internal structure is going to stay bullish until it takes out that high. So now we can look for longs with a hell of a lot more confidence, okay? So the area I was looking to get long from was this supply to demand flip here, okay? That makes sense. This is a good POI to look long from. Now, as we play price forward a little bit, obviously we start to pull back like this. Okay, that's nice. Waiting for price to come into here, that would be nice and ideal. And then price pushes to the upside, okay? So you do have a valid M15 POI here because it has broken essentially just fractal structure at this point, right? That is a pullback and it's broken that high. So this is a valid M15 POI. So if you were trading the beginner trade plan, yes, this is an M15 POI in which you can look for M1 entry models for because it's pro M15 swing trend. And it's an M15 POI, right? It's broken structure. So that is all you need from a most basic standpoint for the beginner trade plan. But obviously, if you want to kind of bring your understanding to that next level, what's even better is looking at this internal low is hold. You've waited for the small internal structure to also align bullish. Supply has now failed, and now you have two decent POIs to look to get long from. Which is the better POI? Definitely this one, of course, because this is essentially the unmitigated extreme. It's flipped this level. It's caused this more significant IBOS. This is definitely the high probability POI to be waiting for, and that's what I was waiting for. But I know the question will be, is this a valid area to look for longs from? Yes, it is. The main drawback to this POI is that at this point, price is obviously within this potential, well, it is M15 supply here, so you would have to trade through that, okay? Now, we do have a flip. This is a flip because price has come in. It's failed to put in a lower low, and we've broken and closed above the reaction. So technically, this is an M15 flip zone, but this zone has not, completely failed. The reaction has failed, which is why you have a valid flip. But this zone is still valid until price trades up through it, right? Because there could be enough orders from within here, obviously, to push price back down. So you have to weigh up the risk as a trader if you're happy to trade against that negative confidence. Now, if you look at my pre-session analysis, I didn't actually have this POI join on because I didn't really view it as that significant. At least this one has a decent reaction, right? A decent pullback, which means this is kind of more of a significant, you can kind of see that it's just a much more significant zone, a nice swing that breaks that low. It's got a lot more going through it. I kind of just viewed that as one leg down, then a pullback, then a leg down. So yes, this is supply, it did break this fractal low here, but is it really that significant? It didn't really flip anything to me. It's kind of just, it's not really that much of a zone. It's kind of a nothing thing, a slight pause in price, right, that continued down. So if you combine all, it's one of those situations where, yes, it's on the more aggressive side, and if you doubted it, that's absolutely fine. I'm just trying to explain for maybe going forward in which situations you may want to consider trading through a zone when it's still there. And this could be one of those instances because this is the strong low, internal low. Some of you may have that as mapped with your swing structure as well, which is absolutely fine. You've then waited for that low to hold. Supply has now failed. You've had the internal structure realigned with this larger structure here. So now it's high probability that we expect we can target this week high. It's also the start of the session open. Right, we're coming off the very, very extreme. Like if this is going to hold, this is the area which to do it. So now coming into session open, maybe this is where you want to be a bit more aggressive and understand that price may not come back to this POI. Okay, so now if we drop down to the M1, because you now have your M15 POI, everything's aligned. Now we can look for a potential M1 entry model. Okay, so now here on the M1, you can see that failed reaction here on the M15, right, was also basically your M1 swing breaker structure. So let's kind of look for a POI within here in which we could potentially look to set an entry on, right, playing those continuations. So this is where essentially you have your M1 chock, where you would have had this flip from within here. So I'm going to zoom right in, drag this across. Okay, so we've had a sweep of this liquidity here, these lows as well, right? It's a nice sweep zone, aggressive sort of V-shape continuation that led to an M1 break of structure. There we go, liquidity on the M1. We have that flip, but that flip was already mitigated at that point here, right? So now you have potential sort of demand chain forming, right? If we follow on those mitigations and look to potentially trade from this level here. We then had a bit of a small pullback that then broke that high there. So we have some nice structural liquidity below that low, acting as inducement for the POI. So it makes a lot of sense to play that continuation model from here, nested within that M15 zone, right? So we basically have the M1 pullback. The only thing that's not great about this is it's a lot more ideal if this low mitigates something, which it didn't in this case, but it did sweep liquidity. We had the flips already mitigated and it led to that breaker structure. So there's a lot going for this zone, okay? Obviously it's a bit more aggressive, like I said, because you still have to trade through this M15 POI. But yeah, this is something that I didn't take, just wasn't concentrating enough really. And I was just simply waiting for this, doing other things, doing emails and Discord stuff. And yeah, it's not a good enough excuse. This is me just journaling for myself out loud to you guys, where I need to be a lot more focused around session open, as that's when the highest probability positions are there, and you can get away with just being a bit more aggressive looking for your entry. So yeah, this zone played out. Another thing I'm going to re-mention, I'll probably put a proper post about this in Discord, is what I'm going to be doing going forward now is forward testing, basically always entering on the distal of M1 entry zones, right? M1 pivot POIs, and just putting my stop behind, right? So not using fixed pip rules, but just allowing myself to, let basically reduce the volatility is not becoming something that's holding me back. So what I mean by that is I'm not going to use fixed pip rules. I'm just going to enter always on the distal now with a stop behind. I'm going to forward test this. I'm going to make some adjustments to it as I go. Like I might have like a max pip rule, or in situations where I'll take the whole range. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit of kind of inconsistency here, but this is what I'm just going to forward test and kind of until I sort of build something that I'm pretty happy with the current price action. So I just wanted to make that clear to you guys going forward. So that's your first potential entry. Essentially, you're playing an M15 demands that flip this supply with the M1 sweep continuation. To keep things even more simple, look what you're trying to do from price action. You have that swing higher high, you have that swing higher low, you have that swing higher high, and what you're trying to catch essentially is a continuation of that move. That's all we're trying to do. Yes, price could have come down and mitigated something within here, but there's nothing really that clear from kind of extreme, right? That's already mitigated. So potentially something in this wick, but you can see how this is a much clearer POI, right? Mitigated the flip, continued up there, has some nice inducement, so that makes a lot of sense, okay? Now, maybe you want to wait for a bit more confluence because you're not entirely sure. So at this point, what do we have? We have another M1 swing boss essentially, and that's the continuation of that move. So I'm just going to rein this in a little bit, right? So now like I was saying, if you just want to keep following that order flow, what do we have? We have another sort of strong M1 low to look to trade from. Okay, so at this point, this would be your unmitigated extreme. Whoops. Let's just do it my head in. There we go. Right, from that high there to that low. So this is quite a big candle. Now this is where, again, if you use fixed pip rules, I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what it was being tagged in, but using what I'm forward testing at the moment is I would just look to enter on the distal there and have my stop placed just below probably 4.5 pips there in this instance. Obviously you have some nice inducement here as well in front of the POI, and that would be another potential entry there. Yeah, which was nice. Like, so that's basically your double confirmation entry. So yeah, you can see, hopefully guys, you can see just basically following order flow. But yeah, the main confluence being negative confluence is you're trying to trade through this zone, but you do have the M15 failed reaction, which gave you this as your POI as a flip. Now, in terms of targets, it was a little bit tricky in this instance, because if I go back to the M15, you are having to trade against this POI here now, which is a bit more significant than this one, because you can just clearly see, even if you don't view that as a flip, it is a bit of a stretch. I want us to buy to sell wicks, but you can see it has a clear pullback, and then it essentially causes that movement there. Now, with these old zones, especially when you have internal structure realigned, all I expect from these suppliers is not necessarily that a lower high is going to form like that. I just expect it to provide a reaction for an internal pullback to then continue to move. The problem is because if you're in the trade here, which is kind of halfway up this one leg, it's hard to know if you have enough stop loss protection if you're long from here, because this could provide enough of a reaction to pull back into here, stop you out, and then continue to move. Okay, so obviously management is very, very personal, and it's going to be down to you whether you want to take partials here, whether you want to just be quick in and out 5R, take full profit, or whether you want to hold full volume. I hope you ride out that pullback and you can target the week high and potentially beyond, right up to the next 4-hour supply level. Right, they're all the things that you have to bear in mind as a trader. For the majority of you, I would say just try and stick to kind of a fixed R rule, rather than technical targets. But yeah, this supply zone is definitely something I would have been wary of if I was within a trade. That's just something you're going to have to decide what you want to do as a trader and what works best for you. But yeah, definitely this would be a bit more of a POI. I would have been a bit more cautious about. Okay, but yeah, if you're in the trade, it ends up blasting up through. Now, is this something I would take a short from? Not really, right? Because you're trying to trade against the swing trend, you're trying to trade against the internal trend. Just shorting from that with an M1 shock, you're going to take a lot of losses if you do that, right? So that would not be an area in which I would recommend taking shorts from, right? In this instance, with a lot of momentum, just not a smart area to be doing that, in my opinion. And then price eventually shoots up and continues. So could you have taken a long entry from within here? Doesn't really meet my rules personally. That's kind of just chasing a bit. Yes, in this instance it works, but you'll probably find you'll get a lot burnt if you just trying to jump in on every M1 continuation. You can see how this has a lot more going for it. There's a lot more logic and confidence behind it, primarily that it has an M15 POI as well. This has a nice pullback, it sweeps. I've gone through the entry model here, whereas this is kind of, you just try and chase price at this point. Can you do it? Can you get away with it? Yes, maybe when momentum is strong. It's just not something I personally do, or something I would necessarily recommend. And obviously you're buying a lot nearer the high at this point. But yeah, not to say you can't do it, it's just not something I'd personally recommend. And then obviously at this point we start to come up in towards the next 4-hour supply zone, where we can expect potentially a bit of a pullback from. But I would recommend for the majority of you wait for an M15 chock, bearish chock from the 4-hour POI, which is what we recommend in the beginning plan, because you're only very likely to get a small bit of a small reaction as price builds liquidity, and typically, not always, but typically it'll be a small reaction, then it will sweep those highs, and then maybe you'll get like the chock or IBOS, and then that's when you have a lot more confluence to then play the pullback down and towards these levels. Okay, that's why for the majority of you, we want to be focusing on those pro internal trend and ideally pro swing trend as well moves to catch those moves. So yeah, so for me that does count as a beginner trade plan entry. Is it the easiest? Is it the most sort of, let's say, bread and butter textbook entries? No, it is a bit more on the advanced side, but this is something you guys who are trading that and getting used to the style of trading can look to work your way towards. Okay, but I would say that that's the type of trade that I would want you guys to start to be looking at getting involved with. There's slightly more sort of aggressive setups. Do you have to take them? Do you, if you're someone who doesn't want to trade through an M15 POI? No, but I hope you can kind of see in these situations, and this is why always trading can be quite a case-by-case scenario, but in this situation, this wouldn't have been something I would be massively concerned about. But yeah, in the moment, I wasn't really that keen on it, and I was waiting for this to be hit, which is why I didn't take them. But I am personally classifying that as more of a mistrade because of this specific scenario, right? It's always kind of case by case with the bigger picture. We'd come into the strong low, it was likely going to hold, internal structure has shifted bullish. Everything was aligned. Supply had failed. It's the start of the session. There's decent risk reward up towards the swing high. So yeah, it can be, at least for me personally, that kind of meets my risk appetite in what I would want to get involved, right? Because this is just not really that significant of a zone, in my opinion. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, it's just the main thing I want you guys to focus on is when it's more about like waiting for everything to align. And in this instance, we had done that. If you can kind of know when to wait for that and understand the internal structure framework that we use, it can really help you to give confidence of when to put on your foot on the gas and when to be a bit more aggressive. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next one.